This is what we do right here. We are here for you. You say, well, who else? Anybody else leaving? Yep. Anybody else coming? We'll be here to find that out too. Bishop Thomas, the latest that we have to update you on now. Bishop Thomas, defensive tackle, who at the beginning of camp in spring here, Tom, they efforted to put on the outside there at defensive end, which raised an eyebrow for me. I kind of thought, well, that doesn't seem like a move you would make. I think he has zero chance to play that position. It didn't take, if you will. And so fast forward, the spring of hurt feelings continues. Bishop Thomas nowhere near the rotation at defensive tackle, wasn't going to see the field. And he decides to take it on down the road, and we wish him luck. In terms of impact, Tom, none at all. Zero impact on Florida State here. Yeah. This is what's going to happen as you continue to raise the floor of talent on your roster. And we want to reiterate this. Not everybody that leaves is not impactful. I don't want you to think that we're going to deflect every time you tune into a video or you listen to the Jeff Cameron show or whatever it might be. There are players where we would express extreme concern. I think you saw some of that in the conversation centered around Joshua Farmer. Mm-hmm. But then there are players who, quite frankly, would be guys or candidates that if I were making a list in order to free up space on the roster, perhaps create a little bit more money to go after other people. I'm not sure Bishop Thomas does that necessarily. But the point would be there are some guys I would have said were candidates that you would have asked to take it on down the road. The exit interviews would have been something along the lines of, we really don't have any plans to play you. Perhaps you could be better off at Tulane, whatever it might be. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Every roster is assessed after every session of practice and spring and fall, and coaches have tough decisions to make and players have tough decisions to make when things haven't gone the way that they've wanted them to, or better players have come in and you've been recruited over. And Florida State has recruited over Bishop Thomas. So this is not a stunning turn of events by any stretch.
No, for me, editorial here on the bottom third of the screen, I put DT because he's a defensive tackle. Bishop Thomas is not a defensive end. That's an interior defensive lineman all the way. Win, lose, or draw with him. And just to set a little bit of context on that, last spring camp, fall camp, first year in the program, Bishop was highly talked about and touted along with Daniel Lyons. And there was some flash of potential for Bishop as an early enrollee or a true freshman. I can't really remember which camp it was, but he was talked about neck and neck with Daniel Lyons. On a personal level, this is one that my eyes told me the truth. I thought Daniel Lyons was far and ahead, a different type of prospect than Bishop Thomas, just because Lyons was raw, but was a lot quicker. And he could get around an interior offensive lineman that wasn't a no-name player already as a freshman without any technique. Odell Hagens hated his technique, Daniel Lyons, but they are continuing to progress along, develop him as a prospect. Ayo Tafasi is somebody who was a medical redshirt last fall camp, and he had an impressive spring camp. Once he was available, he was good to go. This is a player that they just didn't have a home for. And as you're growing as a program, as you're getting better as a program, this is the weird thing about the experience, I think, for you and I, buddy, is we put kind of our NFL hats back on, our NFL fan hats back on, which is the mercenary hat. Yeah. Where it's about results and results only, especially in the NIL era. That hat feels more fitted than adjustable. That is just a natural fit for this day and age of college football. And this guy simply, Bishop Thomas, will be good enough to play and start somewhere else. But unless he has exponential growth that they have not seen, it just was never going to be here at Florida State.
Couple things about that, Tom. It is frequently the case in the world of college football that somebody is recruited, heavily recruited even, and they arrive at a place like Florida State, and maybe early on you see some signs as to why they were recruited or well thought of. Yep. And then maybe another step isn't taken, and you wonder if they've reached their ceiling early. We all mature at a different rate. And sometimes a guy's best days are his senior year in high school. Sometimes a guy's best days are in AA, and then they get the call up to the bigs and they can't hit water if they fell out of a boat. It's different for everybody. So you do have to constantly amend the way you think about a person as the days go by. Like early on, they might surprise you. And then, a year goes by and they're still at that same place and you really don't see potential for growth. And maybe they need to take a step back and play somewhere else where they can get more reps and the talent level is better suited for them. Other times, guys aren't highly touted at all. You don't think much of them. They go out of high school to a place like, I don't know, Western Michigan, and they end their career at a place like Florida State because they've grown and become something other than what they were in high school to an extent that nobody could have imagined. And all of a sudden they're starting at a big-time Power 5 school. So we see this stuff all the time. And again, it's not personal. You guys will know when I like a guy or don't like a guy. This has nothing to do with that at all. This is just business, man. And it's becoming more and more, as Tom just said, a business. It was always, but it's gotten really big now because there are money. There are monies to be had and to be dispersed differently. And when a guy, is in a situation like that, I'm not saying Bishop Thomas, but when we look at the situation through that lens is what I'm trying to say, then yeah, you just become much more cold, calculated. Hey, can he play? No? Well, let's get him out of here.
Well, the funny thing is, I think if you were a head coach who was dishonest in the previous era, you can no longer afford, literally, to be dishonest with a player, because if you were that guy who wanted to always keep your players on the roster till you decided it was processing time,
yeah,
kind of like a safety blanket, well, the check and balance now is that the collective is going to pay that kid $50, and they're going to say, well, what gives? Coach keeps saying he loves me, but the collective is paying my teammate over here 5 figures or 6 figures, and they're paying me next to nothing. What's the disparity? That can't happen anymore. I think if you're a coach, and Mike Norvell is not this way, he's pretty blunt, and he can be in the practice fields, and I'm sure in the exit interviews that he had coming out of spring camp, he can be blunt. You have to be, because the players are going to get the message about whether or not their performance is cutting it.
Correct.
Based upon what the collective is willing to offer them. So I'm not saying that happened in this case. It's just a function of if a player wants a true performance evaluation, it doesn't actually have to come from the coach's office either. It could just come from what the collective associated with the university is willing to fork over.
If we're taking inventory now and we're looking at these guys that have entered their name into the portal and followed through with it and are on their way on down the road, I'd still argue at this point, depending on when you're watching this or listening to this, that Florida State is doing very well here. This is not, a be-all, end-all moment where you go, oh, man, they just lost a key cog. This was a guy that's going to change their fortunes. He's worth, we do the wins above replacement and all that stuff. I mean, you really haven't – Farmer would have been one. You really haven't had a guy just yet where you go, ooh, okay, now that is a problem. To some degree – looking back, I wish Malik McClain, again, would not have moved on. I get it. He chose to do that. I think he would have had an impact on this receiving room. And to what extent, I think we could debate. But truthfully, again, not taking shots at anybody, the guys that have entered so far and actually now followed through, I don't think we're guys that were going to change your fortunes. No, so Florida State's in a good position.
I think it's McClain and McClendon at this point, as we record this right now, with Bishop Thomas not being on the Florida State roster again. Yeah. There could be an update in which Bishop goes to social media as we're recording this, or official reports that he's in the portal. But we ran with it when he's no longer on the roster. That's as good of a tell as you need. But from that point on, maybe there is somebody. But to your point right now, as we sit here recording this video, it's Malik McClain and then McClendon, who was going to be either a starter or a rotational defender.
One way or the other, he would have gotten a lot of time, just like McClain would have. So, yeah, I mean, those are the only two guys. And in this era, nobody goes out unscathed. You're going to lose a guy somewhere along the way who is going to contribute in some capacity. So, again, I don't think Florida State has been, had their wind knocked out of them or anything like that so far with what we've heard from the transfer portal. And hopefully, knock on wood, it continues to be that way. You'll want to know anytime there's an update. So if you're watching on Warchant TV, thanks a lot for that. Like and subscribe, and you'll get the notifications as we sit here and hold our breath by the hour all the way through Sunday, which is the date that comes and goes and players have to have announced by. So we will see if there are more in the future. You'll find it out right here on Warchant TV. Wake Up Warchant, the Jeff Cameron Show, Seminole headlines on the site itself, warchant.com. So many articles still to come, obviously updating you on where this leaves Florida State. That's all for now. Bishop Thomas no longer on the roster at Florida State.